Thank you so much for pulling up. I think I spent a lot of time talking about health and fitness, getting some of the politics type stuff. Don't spend enough time yet, or at least I haven't yet, talking about personal finance. Right, so it seems to be like that. That is right up the. It's kind of in your wheelhouse. I'll start with an easy question. What do you wish more people knew about finance? Like I'm talking about the average person, like just the average Joe sitting at home.
Yeah, I would say the foundational concept that I think would help everyone listening is really um, compound interest. So it kind of gets thrown around all the time. It's eighth wonder of the world or whatever you want to say. But a lot of people don't realize that the impact of starting early when it comes to investing for your financial future. I saw something today. Actually, another content creator put out a reel, and he was talking about the amount needed to invest from 25 to 65 to have $2 million invested versus
Mhm.
35 to 65. And I can't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but the 25 was $600 a month to be able to get there, and 35 was somewhere like $1,200 a month. So the principle remains the same of if you want to be wealthy over the long term, it's really going to benefit you to start early and let your investments compound over time without selling them or interrupting that growth.
Got it, got it. Yeah, so that's good because you're not a get rich quick type of person. You see a lot of that these days. Everyone's like, "Hey, dump all your money into Nvidia. Hey, buy some Bitcoin." I'm not against Bitcoin, by the way, but a lot of people are very much. This whole society's turned into this instant gratification. They want it now, and I love that you're taking that approach of get rich slow. Right? Like it's not sexy. It's
Mm-hmm.
not something people want to hear, but I think it's exactly what people want to hear. Or sorry, what
Yeah,
no people need to hear, not what they want to hear.
yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. Getting rich slow is what people need to hear because they need to set the expectations accordingly. Because, at the end of the day, building true wealth is a series of habits that are going to have to be executed for years and years on end. And it's going to get old. It's going to feel like you need to be doing something different. You need to be doing something faster, whatever it may be. But actually, just doing the same good things for 10, 15, 20 years, and then you look up and what your future is exactly where you wanted it to be. Because yeah, like you said, people are looking for the hack, the 20-minute abs, the shortcut to wealth, and really there is no shortcut. It's going to require dedication and hard work to be able to get there.
Well, I'm glad that you didn't sugarcoat it. I think that message is starting to resonate with more people, but I think there's still a lot of folks that need to come around to that with respect to everything, whether that be health and fitness, personal finance, whatever. So,
Mhm.
do you have a particular approach you take with people? Because some people are like, "Hey, we're going to be super conservative and we're going to dump everything into the S&P 500." Right? You look at the returns the S&P's had historically, and it seems like a fail-safe approach for a lot of people. Do you take that track, or do you sort of suggest something more sophisticated?
I would say we don't we're in the same direction. I would say that's directionally correct. But just buying the S&P 500, I've actually just made so many reels about that recently. Just buying the S&P 500, the big issue with it is one, you're not really diversified. The top seven companies of the S&P 500 really drive most of the movement in the value of the index because it is market weighted. So the biggest companies are the ones that move it. So you end up owning, the Amazons, the Facebooks, the Apples and Microsoft of the world, and you're essentially owning those seven stocks when you buy the S&P 500. So that's one big issue. But the other issue is actually what I've been looking at recently and how we're investing for our clients is looking at monetary inflation and comparing asset values to monetary inflation over the last really I've been looking at it
Mm.
since 2001. So since 2001 the S&P 500 is up somewhere around like 301%, and monetary inflation, M2 money supply that you can just look up on Google, is actually up 324%. And so the big issue is, owning the S&P 500. Yeah, it's easy, it's simple, but really you're just going to be treading water with your wealth. I like to look at inflation judged by the money supply, not by CPI, just because the
Mm.
government manipulates CPI so much just to tell a story that they want you to hear. And the basket of goods, if you will, in the CPI is just degraded in quality so much over time, so that they could artificially put out this number and say, hey, look, we're being good guys, and prices are only rising such a little small amount. But then you look at the money supply and it's just gone crazy, especially since 2020. So I think that strategy is where a lot of financial advisors go to play it safe within the box. But honestly, I think this economic environment is just different. And I think it's going to be different from here on out. And I don't think that simple, investing strategy is going to work anymore, to be frank.
Got it, got it. And thank you for, yeah, I sort of teed that one up for you, truth be told. I wanted to talk a little bit about inflation, because I think inflation is very misunderstood, and there's a couple of nerds like us that get a little bit wonky with it. So maybe for
Mhm.
someone who doesn't understand inflation, or maybe might have a misapprehension as to what inflation is, could you give us a quick primer on, because I noticed you called out M2 when you're talking about money supply. It's very nerdy
Mhm.
terms, going to go over most people's heads. So maybe you could take somebody who has a very lay understanding of macroeconomics, or money in general, and talk to me a little bit about inflation.
Absolutely. So most people think that the CPI, or most people think that inflation is the CPI, the consumer price
Hmm.
index that the government, puts out on, I think, a quarterly basis. I can't remember exactly how often they report it, but essentially what it is they're saying, okay, here's a basket of goods, is what they call it, that a normal person would need to purchase on a regular basis to live. So, things like gas, food, housing, other things that we have to pay for on a day-to-day basis, or at least semi regularly. And so they take the average prices of this basket of goods, and then they take the average again in a quarter or in a year or whatever, and they say, okay, here's how much the prices have gone up or down, and that's inflation. um, it's a very rudimentary way, I would say, to calculate inflation, because one, I mean, inflation is going to be different for everybody. As we know, out in California, cost of living is insane. So inflation for them is going to look a lot different than someone in middle of nowhere Oklahoma. It's going to be very, very different. And also another big issue with the CPI is the cost of the goods that they are actually putting into this calculation. They're changing on a regular basis, and so it's okay
Why
if
would
we
they do that, Mitch? Why would they do that, Mitch?
because they're printing so much money that the actual inflation of things that people actually want, are much higher. And so they want to, again, to tell that story, to make them look good, and they continue to essentially rob you from behind the scenes, if you will. So yeah, the goods within the CPI. I mean, what what they essentially want to do is lower the quality of those goods. So instead of judging the price increase of your new house, they'll judge the price increase of some other. I think all of us have seen the new housing developments coming out where everything looks
Hmm.
smaller, everything is low quality. And that's just because the cost of all of the materials that go into building that house have increased so much that these companies that are trying to build these houses have to manage their costs in some way, and so they start to use lower and lower quality stuff. And so, instead of judging inflation by the grass-fed beef that we want to get at the store, or even asset prices, like, I would say that everyone in the world wants to invest. Some people just don't have the ability to, and so we don't even factor in asset inflation into that calculation. And so they'll put in a bunch of things like, I don't know, some widget that can be produced very easily at a low cost that hasn't changed in so long, or they'll Instead of the grass fed beef, for example, they'll throw in the Domino's pizza or whatever it is and say,
Hmm.
look, your food isn't costing any more than it was 4 years ago. When, in reality, all of us go to the grocery store and we see the prices are higher. We feel it on a day to day basis.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And for all the nerds out there, that's called hedonics. That's how they manipulate the CPI. If you want to Google that term, that's a fun little rabbit hole to go down. Another thing I think that is important to note for the layperson is when you talk about
Hmm.
inflation, to understand that inflation actually means an increase in the money supply. Rising prices are a consequence of inflation, right? Like that's the
Hmm.
trailing indicator. That's like, hey, that's your signal that they've inflated the money supply. It's like a balloon. It's just like the size of the balloon is it growing or shrinking? And so I think that oftentimes trips people up, and I think you have a very thorough understanding of that. So thanks for that.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think an easy kind of analogy or story to tell to explain inflation to people is, imagine there were five people on an island in a community, and they all had $1. So there's $5 total in existence, and then somebody just pulls up on the shore one day with $1,000. Like if I'm the guy who used to be selling coconuts in that island, I'm probably selling it for 5 cents. But now all of a sudden we have $1,005 in circulation. Everyone has a lot more money. I'm going to start charging $10 for my coconuts. Like
Hmm.
that is the logical way to understand inflation. It's more money coming into a society, and business owners are, they're made out to be evil for raising prices or whatever, but essentially that's what's happening. They're recognizing that, hey, there's more money in existence. My costs are going up because of that. And so I will charge more on the front end, because people will pay it.
Yeah, they often refer to that as too many dollars chasing too few goods, right? That's kind of what we're seeing on the ground.
Yeah.
And that leads to something called malinvestment. So, um, something really important people should understand is that there's a lot
Mhm.
of ways that money pumping into the system distorts the economy and causes problems. But I think you would probably agree there's some opportunity for some smart people when you're in an inflationary environment. Do you have some advice for folks like that?
Absolutely. I mean, right now it's essentially get as close to the money printer as possible, and so you want to invest in hard assets. So that's going to be assets. I know you mentioned Bitcoin before. I'm a big
Hmm.
Bitcoin advocate, so Bitcoin's definitely up there. But we also are including gold, other commodities, real estate in our portfolio, because these are assets that the supply is limited, and so if you have the amount of money in circulation continuously increasing, and they're all kind of bidding for the same amount of assets that were previously, the same 20 years ago, those prices are going to continue to rise. And so that's really the best thing that we can do, is to own things that go up in value the most when the money supply continues to increase exponentially, because at this point it's a cycle that they really cannot put a stop to, and the money supply is going to continue to increase at a faster and faster pace, because of that.
Oh, hold on a second, Mitch. You just I've been hearing the Federal Reserve saying that the inflation is coming under control. We're starting to turn the corner. It's taming. Are you telling me that you think the long term is going to be anything other than what Mr. Powell says?
Well, I mean, even if inflation is under control, usually what that means is they're going to lower interest rates, which then increases the money supply even faster. And then, they're going to continue to increase, the money supply more and more. Um, yeah, and they have to, because the government debt is becoming so large, and with high interest rates, the government has to pay so much interest on their debt that I think it's at $1 trillion a fiscal year now, just the interest expense on the debt. And so, they already spend in such a massive deficit that they have to continue to issue more debt. Fed buys it, and there's just that cycle will continue. And so, in order to prevent that from blowing up in their face, they'll have to lower the interest rates back down, and then we'll go through this all again.
Yep, yep. I completely agree with you. I think that they've painted themselves into a corner to which there's no escape other than probably default. I think there's got to be a hard default at some point. I think anyone who's deep in monetary policy understands that inflation technically is a default. It's a soft default, like Ron Paul would say. It's the way you pay back your debt with money that's worth less than when you initially borrowed it, which is a form of default, but it's a
Mhm.
sneaky way. And I think that people, if they're smarter about money, you can profit, right? In a highly inflationary environment. One of the things that I noticed early on, I've been studying this for years, is that the rich people really seem to do well in an inflationary environment because they're the ones who first receive those newly printed dollars and put them to work, like you said, investing in various types of assets, right? And so I
Mhm.
think the shrewd personal investor could probably find some opportunities. So one that I
Mhm.
agree with you on is Bitcoin. So maybe if you could give us like a little high level overview of why Bitcoin, like why should somebody today, when Bitcoin's $70,000 per, consider something like Bitcoin?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's really two ways to look at it. What Bitcoin is and the problem that it solves, and also where we are in the cycle of Bitcoin right now. So I'll go through the maybe the flashier portion first of where we are in the Bitcoin cycle. So when you look at Bitcoin historically, every 4 years, there's a Bitcoin halving. And so, what
Hmm.
that means is essentially the new Bitcoin coming into existence gets cut in half. So, in 2012, from 2009, when Bitcoin first started, to 2012, there was 50 new Bitcoin coming into existence every 10 minutes. And then it's gotten cut in half every 4 years up until most recently, April 19th of this year, and it was cut down to 3.125 new Bitcoin every 10 minutes. And so every time that this supply gets cut, we see a massive skyrocket in the Bitcoin price. Again, it's happened in 3 4 year periods previously. Will it happen this time? To be determined. Can we predict the future? No, but usually the future rhymes with the past. And so here we are, Bitcoin just had that halving occur 2 months ago. And usually the price peaks anywhere from 12 to 18 months after that halving. And so, if it continues to do what it has done in the past, it has a lot more room to grow. The smallest increase of Bitcoin 1 year after the halving was 288% so far, and so in April this year was at 69,000. If we get a 300% increase, that's a 4x in Bitcoin, and there we are at 280,000. Whether that happens or not, I believe that it will go up, from here, at least enough to be a worthwhile investment, even while it's still at 70,000, or, well, I think 67 something today. It fell for whatever reason. And so there's that timing aspect of it, of why it's a good investment, at least right now. And then the second thing is more, what Bitcoin is, what it stands for, and the problem that it solves. And I think the simplest way to explain Bitcoin is it is freedom money. It is um, money that cannot be controlled by the central government, by the Federal Reserve. It cannot be controlled by these centralized authorities that manipulate the money supply in their favor. And so it truly is fair for everyone involved, and it cannot be corrupted by them. And so I would say at a high level, that's the best way to put it. Is, all this inflation that we're talking about is essentially us, the little guy, if you want to put it that way, being stolen from. We
Hmm.
had $1,000 in our bank account yesterday, and then a year from now, that $1,000 will be able to buy, $900 worth of stuff. And that continues to happen every single year. And so without us doing anything, we're still going to work, trying to earn money, and we haven't done anything to lose value in our money. It's still being taken away from us. And so that's where Bitcoin comes in. It cannot be controlled by a central authority that has their best interest in mind over yours. And the big thing with this money supply talk is Bitcoin is perfectly scarce. So there will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin in existence. That can change, but it will be very, very difficult to get that change to happen, because everyone who's involved in the network is incentivized for that not to happen. And so,
Right.
you would have to have a group majority agree that, hey, we would like to make this change. And if it's not in the best interest of the group, it's not going to be made. So, it's perfectly scarce in that way. Of there will never be any more Bitcoin in existence than 21 million.
Cool, cool. Well, thanks for that overview. That's great to know. And it's weird that the halving definitely doesn't seem like it's behaving like the other ones prior so far. So it's a bit. I've been keeping my eye on that
Mm-hmm.
one. I'm long Bitcoin, so I don't get too pressed about daily fluctuations. And by the way,
Mm-hmm.
if you are considering Bitcoin, be prepared for volatility. This sucker will whipsaw up and down like nobody's business. So my advice is, and I'm not a financial advisor, but I'm just a rando on the internet. But I would say don't put anything into Bitcoin that you can't afford to have short-term losses on, or at least
Yeah.
short-term value fluctuations on, because it
Mm-hmm.
does it tends to be quite volatile. So looking forward a little bit with respect to Bitcoin, um, do you see opportunities when the next financial crisis hits? Right, something I'm keeping my eye on. I think that there is one looming. I think that this house of cards can't keep, being propped up. I think we're still liquidating a lot of that inflation. That newly printed money is kind of making its way through the economy. People's personal finances are being propped up by credit cards. You look at record high credit card debt for consumers. All the telltale signs of a financial crisis on the horizon. Cracks in the housing market, commercial real estate market is about ready to fall apart. Um, it seems like we're on the cusp. And what I've noticed is there's a lot of people that are casino money into Bitcoin. They're playing the game. They're YOLO. And then when things start to get a little bit dark, and then as it gets a little stormy,
Mm-hmm.
folks bail out, and you start to see that those prices drop off, a huge volatility swing. So somebody who has some USD sitting around burning a hole in their pocket might have an opportunity. What do you think about that hypothesis?
Might have an opportunity to buy Bitcoin if that
Yeah, yeah, to
scenario
get
plays
get
out.
in. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I kind of wrestle with this because it, recently with market crashes, the Fed steps in every time, and so they
Yep.
almost prevent it from happening. And then as soon as they step in and prevent natural market fluctuations from happening, the that market becomes tied to the government money printer. And so it's like, yeah, we see all of these signs that point to, okay, we potentially could have very dark times on the horizon, economically speaking. But at the same time, like, I think they are not afraid of continuing to inflate the money away, just to prevent the short term crisis. And so, yeah, it very well could happen. I feel like it's the healthy thing for markets to happen, but whether it does or not, who knows? And so, yeah, I more so take the perspective of a long term investor, where I don't really worry about the next 1 year, 2 years. We want to
Hmm.
look at assets that are going to perform well over time, and we'll go off the data that we have right now. And okay, if we get in your scenario, like someone who's maybe sitting in cash right now, I'm more so a proponent of just getting it invested as long as it's long term money, rather than sitting around waiting on the sidelines. Just because we truly don't know what's going to happen, as much as we think we do. And so I would rather see somebody get in the game rather than continue to sit on the sidelines, because what I end up seeing with people that do that, they hold on to a bunch of cash and they kind of wait for their opportunity, is when the opportunity's there, they're too scared to take it. And so,
Mm.
it's like, well, you missed out on the whole ride up just to wait on your opportunity for the 30%, 50% drawdown. Here it is. You're too scared to go buy in now because you think it's going to keep going. Um, and so then we just get this emotional roller coaster that drives all of our investment decisions. And in my experience, that doesn't work well for the individual investor.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I was just painting a hypothetical scenario and also trying to advertise my little conspiracy theory about what I think is coming in the market. So we'll see TBD if that's accurate or not.
Yeah.
I just know from a Fed perspective, they need to maintain credibility, or at least a semblance of credibility in the markets, and so they need some sort of catalyst. I think people don't realize the Fed actually likes market crashes because then they can swoop in, like you said, save the day, print a bunch of money, and pronounce themselves the hero. I think this recent round of money printing was epic. And I think they're going to have a much
Mhm.
harder time unwinding it. And I typically see two responses, or two catalysts for the Fed intervening like this. Number one's major market crash. Number two is a war, right? So I'm like keeping my eye on Ukraine. I'm keeping my eye like all the conflicts because boy, one of those two things is immediately followed by infinity money printing. I've seen this movie before.
For sure. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the money supply has increased 40%, I think it is, since 2020, when you had the initial beginning of COVID shutdowns. So, that's a pretty sharp increase. And that's why, we're seeing the inflation that we are. It's much higher than I think what they say it is. But yeah, I mean, I, I just I don't see how they can kind of put the cat in the bag, I guess, on this one. But maybe they do. We'll see.
Yeah, yeah, I'm really keeping my eye on CBDCs. You familiar with those?
Absolutely.
I'm wondering where they're going to try to pull the rabbit out of that hat. So maybe for some of our folks that aren't into that space, like, can you give us a quick overview on what CBDCs are?
Yeah. So CBDC stands for Central Bank Digital Currency. And the best way I would say, uh, I'm against it completely. And I'm sure you probably are as well, just through knowing you
Hmm.
through this conversation. The big issue is then if you have a central bank digital currency, you have a programmable money that is in the government's hands. And so the implications of that are very, very scary, because then if you do not act in such a way that they approve of, they can control the money in your bank account. They already do it to some extent because we've seen, over the last 4 years, and this kind of woke a lot of people up, was, bank accounts getting frozen for certain political party affiliates, or people who they're just against, or maybe anti-vaxxers, or whatever you want to say. Like, um, we see this censorship happening in a lot of other ways, social media, et cetera. And so if that starts to happen with money, we have a very serious problem on our hands. And that central bank digital currency would allow that to happen with money. We would essentially end up like China, where every decision that you make as an individual is decided for you by the government. And that's not a world that I want to live in.
Yeah, the implications truly are terrifying. I get told a lot that I got a tinfoil hat and I'm being conspiratorial about it. But if you actually poke at the CBDCs, you look at the drafts that the Fed has put forward as far as what that framework might look like, it is absolutely terrifying. Just imagine the government having a digital trail of every cent that you spend, all of us spend on anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like that alone, minus the sort of fears of a CCP style state where they give you a social credit score. Like the possibilities are infinite, but just the base layer, like what you get from day one, without any conspiracies attached, is absolutely terrifying for anyone who's paying attention. So I see Bitcoin, as you probably do, as like an antidote to this a little bit. I do have some concerns with Bitcoin because, like as governments hate competition, and they've been trying their
Mm-hmm.
best to, at least at the exchanges, implement. And obviously now it's you have to file Bitcoin disclosures on your tax returns. They're trying to get their fingers into it, right? But I think it's resilient to some of those pressures. But they're certainly trying.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there is, still a likely world where Bitcoin does not become what people believe it can become. Because a lot of things would have to change in the current system for Bitcoin to truly be kind of our everyday money.
Hmm.
But at the same time, I don't necessarily believe that Bitcoin has to become, the medium of exchange and the currency that we use across the country, across the world, to still be valuable for these reasons that we're referring to. And so, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because there is this game theory, if you will, of do I fight against it or do I play along with it? Because most people have realized that if I just join it, I will actually benefit a lot more than fighting it. And so maybe the governments will take that stance. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a future world where Bitcoin doesn't necessarily save us from that financial system that you're describing with CBDCs.
Yeah, here's hoping. I'm always the eternal optimist, so I think we at least cross our fingers together and hope for the best. We'll see what actually shakes out.
Mm-hmm.
So let me talk to you a little bit about debt, right? From a personal finance perspective. What are your thoughts? Because there's by the way, you're a Christian, I believe. Like it's a
Mm-hmm.
really important part of your channel and you personally.
Yeah.
Are you aligned with like the Dave Ramsey, like no debt, or do you have to take a little more nuanced position? Like how do you figure debt into someone's personal finances from your perspective?
Dave Ramsey is great for the people that he speaks to. I mean, he is speaking to a mass market audience that is strapped with debt. I mean, you just quoted it earlier about, we have the highest credit card debt levels in history, on an average household basis. And so if you just look at the environment, it's like his advice is probably really good for 60, 70% of the population. Now, do I agree with the extreme take that he has against it? Not really. Even despite coming from the same faith Christian foundation, I think neither of us would argue that debt free is a bad financial position to be in. Um, you know, and Dave as well. I mean, he experienced bankruptcy in his 20s. And so I think that also plays into his view and his recommendations to other people. I mean, he over leveraged himself in real estate. It went poorly and he had to file for bankruptcy. And so I think that also influences his perspectives. But at the same time, like I said, I don't think that anyone would say being debt free is a poor financial position. And so where I come from, how I view it as a Christian and as a financial advisor is we want to take a more intentional approach to utilizing debt because the Bible does say the borrower is slave to the lender. And I don't think that means we shouldn't have any debt. I don't think that means we should avoid it altogether. I think that means that we need to be careful with the amount of debt that we take on because, even you, not being a Christian, would agree that if I have all of my income going to debt payments, I essentially am working to that for that person that I
Hmm.
borrowed the money from. So I'm working for the bank if all of my income is going to loan payments. And so you essentially are a slave to the lender in that aspect. And so I think it's more of a heat of caution against debt and getting into this place where money essentially becomes your God because then you answer or you have to make the decisions in your life based on how am I going to repay this debt, not how am I going to honor God or listen to what He is calling me to. And so that's the perspective that I take on it. We have clients that invest in real estate, and leveraging debt is a big part of investing in real estate and getting the most out of
Hmm.
that. Or even just everyone buying a house or getting a car, like if you take an extreme position, like everyone needs a car to be able to go to work, and so I'm not, it's like, what are you going to tell the person that doesn't have a car? They just got a job, 30 minutes away or something. They have the money to be able to pay a car payment, but they don't have the cash yet to buy a car outright. You going to tell them, no, don't get a car? Like, absolutely not. And so, yeah, I take a more nuanced approach with an understanding and appreciation for where he comes from.
Got it. That helps. So do you have like a framework that you've developed? Do you have like any sort of like don't any rules around debt? Some people, have these various benchmarks, like don't, carry more than 20% of your revolving credit card balance. Don't, do you have any of those like do's and don'ts or any sort of like hard like guidelines, or is this just try to maintain responsibility and don't lose control and use debt intentionally?
I wouldn't say I have any hard and fast, don't break these rules. Um, but what I would say is, one, you need to know your current financial circumstances. Most people make decisions without knowing where they are currently, and that is just a recipe for disaster. And so your jaw would absolutely hit the floor if you knew how many people that come talk to me or that I talk to that don't know how much they make in income, how much they're spending on a regular basis, what their assets are, and what their liabilities are. These are foundational personal finance concepts that people aren't taking the time to learn, or aren't creating the space in their life to keep up with. And so what that gets you into is now you're making decisions from an unknown place. And when you go to look at houses, the emotional of like, oh, we really like this house, we need 5 bedrooms for all of our kids or whatever, make you make that decision to purchase the house without ever looking at, will we be able to actually afford this on a monthly basis? And so I think if more people actually had an accurate, up to date view of their current financial circumstances, they would actually be able to make better decisions around debt, because then they would be able to look at, okay, here's what the payment's going to be. Here's what, maintenance is estimated at. Here's what I'm going to pay in interest, or if it's a house, property taxes, all of these things, PMI, whatever, if you're not making 20% down payment, and you can actually make an informed decision. And I truly believe that people will live below their means if they know they're about to make a decision that would cause them stress, that would steal their peace, that would put them in a position where they're going to be in a negative, cash flow position on a monthly basis. And so we're not stupid as humans. So if we're given the right information, we can make good, sound financial decisions. I don't think we necessarily need to follow all of these rules of thumb, because they don't apply in everyone's circumstances.
I totally get that, and I vibe with that. I think the thing that I'm partial to Dave Ramsey on is the psychological component, right? Because I think some folks have a real hard time with the credit cards and the debt. It's so easy to, like I said, people aren't stupid, but we can fool ourselves. You can be, you rationalize like, oh, we can afford this. It's just this much more. It's so easy with that debt to get trapped, right?
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes people do well to have some sort of guardrails, even if they're
Yeah.
not hard and fast rules. But sometimes people, I think that's why Dave is so extreme on it, is that it's like, no is an easy thing to follow, like no debt free. That's what we're aiming for, right? But I do think debt is important, and I think particularly as you called out with real estate, I think there's some real magic there. Taking this worthless paper fiat, taking on some
Yeah.
debt, and you get yourself a solid asset like a home. So maybe talk to me about how
Mhm.
you view real estate, because I think it's magical, and I think you probably share a similar view. But I wanted to get your take.
Yeah. It's a tough one, especially coming from a Bitcoin perspective, because real estate investing, I think, is a downstream effect of the financial system that we have, because our money supply is based on debt. We are encouraged to take on debt to become the wealthiest that we can possibly be, because of what you said. I mean, you're taking a money that becomes worth less and less over time, and if you have a fixed payment, usually you're going to make more over time. And so your payment actually gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, as you make more money, and the value of the asset that you bought is going up, consistently, because of the money supply expanding. And so it's a symptom of of a system that I struggle, that I don't really like. But to when you look at the tax code, you look at our current financial system, it's the, I won't say easiest, but it is the most obvious wealth building strategy in existence. Because you can, make a good amount of cash flow, little to no taxes, and you can buy an asset, with 80%, maybe even more of the bank's money or other people's money, rather than your own. And so, yeah, from a financial advisor perspective, it's like, yeah, it's the closest thing you can get to a cheat code in our current financial system. But I have a hard time, being a big fan of it just because of what I mentioned earlier.
Got it. Got it. So you called out tax code. So are you really well versed in tax code stuff, or you stick to financial stuff?
Yeah, so we help clients with tax planning as well. So we help our clients with really everything that affects their money, everything from their cash flow on a monthly basis to their taxes to their estate plan, insurance, everything that could impact them financially. We're going to advise them on it. So yeah, I would say I'm fairly uh, familiar with the tax code for sure.
Got it, got it. So could you maybe highlight some of the benefits in the tax code around real estate ownership? I think that's a big one that a lot of people use, particularly high, like W-2 income earners. There's a lot of tricks there. So I wanted to see if you could give some folks some advice that might be in that camp. By the way, my day job, I'm a tech exec. And so I'm around some sort of like high, high wealth, high income earning individuals that this might be speaking to.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a big misconception with investing in real estate. Everyone does throw it around as this kind of tax loophole, if you will. Um, but there are some hurdles that you do have to jump over in order to get the most out of investing in real estate. And so, just to use the example that you gave, a W 2 employee. So, most W 2 employees believe that they can go out, buy a rental property, and that's going to offset the taxes on their income that they make from their job, when in reality, it's really not going to, because there are two buckets of income and losses. There are passive income and passive losses, and there's active income and active losses. And so your W 2 job falls under that active bucket. And because you have a W 2 job, that real estate investment actually falls under the passive side. And so that is a common misconception of, hey, I can just go buy a rental property. This will save me 50 grand on my taxes. And, if I just do this every single year, like I'll be, extremely wealthy and pay very little in taxes. And so the best strategy for a W 2 employee to make this work and actually get the tax savings is short term rentals. So, to be able to qualify the losses against your income, you have to be actively, or you have to materially participate in the real estate. And so there is actually somewhat of a loophole, if you will, with short term rentals. The barrier to be able to qualify as a real estate professional and get the deductions from real estate to offset your W 2 income are much lower with short term rentals versus long term rentals. And there's a lot of classifications or things that you need to make sure you're meeting to get this, but it is possible to be able
Hmm.
to do. And so if you go out, buy an Airbnb, and then you have to do some jump through a few more hoops, which we can get into if you want to, but that's going to be the best, most effective way for a W 2 employee to significantly cut their tax bill.
Got it, got it. And I think there are probably some more advanced strategies folks can deploy too, right? So, for example, I've heard that you can get, an LLC or something that holds the property that's owned by the individual that has a W-2 income, and they can do somewhat accelerated depreciation, bring some of that forward. There's some like advanced hacks to sort of
Mm-hmm.
leverage, the tax code in our favor. Is that comport with your understanding as well? I'm a complete layperson around this, so I'm just repeating stuff I've heard on the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. So the biggest thing that allows you to offset your income with buying real estate is the depreciation expense that comes from owning, material, tangible assets. And so essentially what you were just describing, I'll just kind of run through an example. Let's say you are that tech executive making a high W 2 salary. and you go out and buy, a $500,000 Airbnb. What you'll want to do is you actually want to do a cost segregation on the property. And so what that cost segregation does, it allows you to split out different components of the building. And so you'll have, the main structure, you'll have the doors, you'll have the windows, the fence in the outside, maybe the driveway or whatever it is. And splitting out those components and assigning a value to those components of the property allow you then to take more depreciation. So by default, residential real estate and commercial real estate are different, but residential real estate, you can depreciate over a 27 and a half year period. So by default, you just take the value or what you paid for the real estate, divide by 27 and a half, and that's the deduction that you get every single year. And the way that this works is that depreciation deduction, there's no money actually leaving your bank account. The IRS is giving you an incentive basically for owning the real estate. And they're saying, okay, that building is going to deteriorate over time. So we'll allow you to account for that deterioration as if it were an expense that you paid with, from your bank account. And so by default, like I said, it's a over the period of 27 and a half years. But when you do this cost segregation, you split out these components, it allows you to it allows you to depreciate portions of that property faster. And so you get anything that is 15 years or less can be taken as bonus depreciation, like you mentioned earlier. So in 2017, Trump put into law the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, which introduced 100% bonus depreciation, which it has now started to phase out. They might bring it back. They've talked about that. And so what 100% bonus depreciation means is you can depreciate every component of that property that can be depreciated on 15-year or less schedule, all in the first year. That's what 100% bonus depreciation means. And so typically 30% of the value of the property can be depreciated in 15 years or less. So if you go buy this $500,000 property, you can deduct 30% of that property value in the first year. And so, what is that? A third? So then you're at what,
150K?
Yeah, around there, 150K, a little bit more of a tax deduction, which then, if you meet the requirements for the short-term rental loophole, if you will, and you qualify as materially participating in managing that property, then you can take that 150K deduction, offset your W-2 income in that instance. That scenario is with 100% bonus depreciation. This year, I think it's at 60%. But like I said, they might bring it back. But yeah, that's essentially why real estate has become so popular even among W-2, high earning employees, is because of the rise of Airbnb and these short-term rentals and that tax loophole, if you will, not being closed up.
Got it. Totally makes sense. And I'm glad that I'm not completely off in left field because I've been thinking about doing something like this. So, man, I appreciate that advice. Can I take a hard left turn real quick
Sure.
and talk about the other aspect of your channel, which is the faith thing, right? So, to give you a background for me, I was raised kind of religious, uber Catholic, did the sort of non-denominational Christian thing for a while, and ended up being a really angry atheist for a while. Like the whole new atheist thing, man, I ate that stuff up. And I've had
Yeah.
several experiences in the last 5-7 years that have me open. Let's put it that way. So I call myself agnostic. I think the correct answer to the God question is agnosticism, meaning it is an unknowable question. You can have faith, you can have your belief, but I don't think it's a knowable question. That's just my stance. That said, I'm open, right? So I like to hear people's take. Like, how do you view things, and if there's like a personal story attached to it, I just want to give you a platform to
Mm-hmm.
sort of make your pitch and give us your background and maybe talk about why that's important to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a better place to go would just be a back and forth conversation with you and I, because I'm curious to hear your journey
Oh,
and how,
cool.
because growing up Catholic, and then you did the non-denominational, and then you became the angry atheist. I'm sure there are reasons why. Um, and so, yeah, I would actually like to hear from your perspective what, if you don't mind sharing your
Oh
experience,
no.
and then we can kind of go back and forth. And I think that'll be a more fruitful conversation than just me, talking for a while about it.
Hey, sure, sure. Happy to go that route, man. Yeah, it's interesting because I mean, when I say Catholic, I mean like the most Catholic of Catholics, right? So, my my great grandmother immigrated from Czechoslovakia, right? So we're talking,
Mm,
like it's in the DNA. My grandfather's brother, so my great uncle, was a bishop of the state of South Dakota for 28 years. That's like the high, like that's below cardinal, right? I got a cousin, no, my mom's cousin was a Jesuit, still is, sorry, Jim. He's a Jesuit in the Vatican. I'm talking
wow.
completely credentialed. And if you know anything about Catholicism, particularly people that take it seriously, it is punitive. It's more hellfire and brimstone than like Southern Baptist, right? Like it is very, very strict. And I talked to somebody that was in that sort of a standard non-denominational Christian. I think I was dating her actually, and it's like, hey, actually, I read the Bible for the first time ever, right? And I was like, oh my gosh, of course, this doesn't make any sense. And so I sort of rejected Catholicism. I was like, well, yeah,
Mm,
this church believes what the Bible teaches, and then I never actually legitimately questioned, like, well, is the Bible true? And that's what led
mm,
me to sort of question some things, and went through that atheist phase where I'm kind of like, okay, the Bible is not literally true, and I can prove it, right? And I got hung up on that a lot, and I got to give a ton of credit to Jordan Peterson. He's the first person that I ever listened to that gave a more sophisticated take on some of the Bible stories, right? So I have a new appreciation, I would say, for those stories in what Brett Weinstein, if you're familiar with him, he's got this category called literally false, metaphorically true. Like I'm a big fan of that one right now, right? Like I very much see value in those stories. Think there's actually truth in them, even if it's not maybe objectively true. So I'm way more open minded, and just for anyone who cares, I know I've talked about it
mhm.
before, but a lot of that openness was mediated by deep psychedelic experiences. Like I've had some very very profound experiences, particular on mushrooms, and that really just kind of blew the top of my head off to the point where like, oh, there's actually something going on here, and that's where I'm at. I don't know what it is. I have a very difficult time defining any of it, but I do know that there's something deep and meaningful and very profound happening with the universe, and I don't understand it. And so I'm very comfortable where I am right now. Like I said, I'm just like, this is where I'm at. I don't have any ill will towards Christianity or any religion in particular, right? And
Yeah.
I don't view it with the same sort of scoffing, like, you dumb dumbs, don't you know that the Earth is more than this old, or whatever the standard new atheist trope is, right? So that's just kind of where I landed, man. That's like that's my full arc in condensed form.
Gotcha. Um, I guess what makes you still skeptical? I heard you say you had some experience that tell you, there is something bigger going on here that is kind of beyond my understanding. Um, yeah, so I'm curious what still makes you feel like it's not something that you want to kind of dive into further, I guess.
Well, it's not necessarily I don't want to dive into it, right? It's like I guess the question is, what's the goal here, right? Like for
Mm,
me, I have some serious problems with the ethics of the Bible, right? Like I'm a very I've gone studied philosophy for almost 20 years now, 18 years, something like that. With a focus on ethics, right? And I'm very concerned with how people treat each other. And some of the ethics that are in the Bible are horrific, right? And it's not just one or two places; it's all over the place. Um, and that's fine. Like I'm not saying that to throw shade at it. And I think there's still a ton of value in there. But when folks I guess it's the claims that are made by people, that this is a
okay.
perfect book and this is exactly how we're supposed to live. And so I have problems with certain claims, and some of it is repugnant to me morally. And so that's like it just sets me at odds with a few components of it, but I feel like I'm very pragmatic to where like I have a great amount of affection for it. I guess looking back, I think that it has tons of value for society. And I
Yeah.
think the people that believe that you can just kick out the support structure of all of Western civilization, replace it with nothing, and expect
Yeah.
anything other than what we're seeing today, they're absolutely lunatics, right? Nietzsche was very famous for saying God is dead, but people very rarely talk about what he said immediately after. And he said, "We killed him, and there's not going to be enough water to wash the blood off our hands." And
Mm.
he accurately predicted basically the entire arc of the 20th century and the Soviet Union and Mao. So I'm not one of these people that's like, just because I have some issues with certain parts of it, like the whole thing should be completely tossed out. Like I've
Yeah.
completely reversed my thinking around that, and I think it's incalculably valuable for society. And I know this is going to ruffle a bunch of people's feathers that are in my community, but I don't care. This is just my take, you know.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of how I'm looking at it. I guess the question is like, what are you using it for? Uh,
Mm.
that's really where it starts and ends for me.
Gotcha. Yeah, well, I respect you boldly and openly sharing, what you think, despite what others may think. I think that we need more conversations like that, regardless of the perspective that people are coming from or what they believe. So, I'll I'll happily admit to you that there are some very messed up things in the Bible and just the stories that are shared about the people of the Bible. Um, but I don't think, like you said, I don't think that that is necessarily a reason to throw it out,
Mm,
as you mentioned, because we got to remember also that everyone except for Jesus in there was a human being who has the same struggles that you and I have on a day to day basis. Um, a lot of the things societally or whatever, there were some real issues, I guess, with how they did things or how people acted. But like, I don't necessarily look to those people as a model for how I should live. I look to Jesus, as a model for how I should live. And so I'll just share kind of my coming to faith journey, my story, and then we can go from there. So for me, it was much more of a logical approach. Being a finance guy, I very much think logically about this. And so what initially got me started was, yeah, I did grow up in a household that would say we were Christians. Now, was there any evidence of it on the outside? No. We didn't really go to church. We didn't pray together, any of that stuff, even despite my grandpa being a pastor. And so it wasn't until I was really 18, 19, early 20s where I started to. My parents got divorced when I was 16. And so that really sent me down this path of wanting to make my life as good as I possibly could. And I viewed that as reaching success. And so at that point, it was
mm,
really wealth. That was what success was for me. I looked up to these entrepreneurs, these motivational speakers, these kind of guys that were like, all about self development and being successful. And so through my path of actually the different girls that I dated throughout different seasons of my life, I was exposed to father role models that were successful. So they had, a great family, they were wealthy, and they had a life that I really desired. And so, because of my parents' divorce, my life was really chaotic for a long time there. And so, being able to see these role models of like, that's actually a guy that I want to be like, and through seeing multiple people who were what I wanted to be, and their foundation, the thing that they said was most important, was faith. And so that was kind of just checking boxes for me. And this is, I think, God's way of using my logical brain to be like, hey, like, you want to be successful. Here are men that, are successful, are you what you want to be like, but they are men of God. And so through that, I started to explore that more for myself. And that's really when my relationship with faith started to grow, and I started to take more personal responsibility for it. Um, and yeah, and so just through continuing to go to church, read my Bible, pray, all of those things, I started to develop an understanding for what it actually meant to be a Christian. And for me, it has now gone beyond that logical place, because like you said, it's there, we don't have these knowable answers, or we don't have these kind of tangible answers, if you will. There is always going to be a leap of faith. That's why it's faith, at the end of the day. And so I couldn't get there all on logic alone. Um, except for maybe one way of thinking through it, where it's like, okay, what are the downsides? I say this to a lot of other,
Yeah.
yeah, I say this to a lot of other logical thinkers that are struggling with this. I say, okay, think about the scenario where you do not believe in Jesus Christ, but it is true, and you go to hell. You know, that is a very scary, I would say, scenario. Or let's say you believe and it's not true. Nothing happens after you die. What did you lose by believing? You probably didn't lose anything, because, like you said, the Bible is a great book on how to live, how to, be a great person. So if Jesus being my Lord and Savior is not actually true, I don't lose anything by believing that my whole life, because I actually lived it out in a way that I, wanted to live out, in a way that I would want my kids to live out, in the way that I wanted people around me to live it out. And so that's kind of how I frame it to logical thinkers, is like, there's really no downsides to believing in Jesus. Um, but yeah, I mean, where it goes beyond logic is essentially, yeah, there it is faith at the end of the day. And I truly believe that there is more to this world. I believe that it is a spiritual world, and there are many things that we cannot see and cannot understand. And so, coming at it from that perspective, I look at the all of God, and the fact to me that God would come down to earth, die for me to save me from an eternity in hell, and that I can go to heaven and spend eternity in a more perfect world, free from sin. And so that, yeah, I think I rambled a little bit there, but what are your thoughts on what I said?
No, no, that's great. Actually, what you articulate is something called Pascal's wager, which is, I mean, or at least a variant of it, right? Which is
Yeah.
like, well, if I believe in there's a God and I'm right, then I go to heaven. If I believe there's a God and I'm wrong, then nothing happens. No big deal. I guess one of the faults in that is, like, unless you pick the wrong God, right? Like, let's get that part wrong, then you're in
Yeah.
trouble. But no, that's super cool, man. And I think there's a lot of utility in, just from a practical standpoint, in believing in something. And I'm a big believer in trying to get as much as we can right, and trying to understand reality as it is to our best of our knowledge. There's a bunch of utility in that. But I also think there's utility from a personal perspective in just having certainty in your faith, right? So let's say there's this baseline thing that we're using science, right, scientific method, to understand the universe to the best of our ability, and then beyond that, if you believe in something else and it helps you move a positive direction. Here's a good example, right? Like, if I say, I believe in the principles of the Bible, and God is going to bless me if I'm, let's say, responsible and dutiful, and I work hard, and I invest my money, and I don't take out debt, right? It doesn't matter if he's real, or if any of that's, like, the Bible is actually the word of God, if the fact that you brought clarity to your mind so you could act, right? Because I think most of it is about action. And if it emboldens you to act, then man, you're going to have some fantastic results. Whereas somebody who doesn't believe in anything, maybe they're nihilist, maybe they're having all sorts of existential dread. This is the only life I get, and I got to get it right. And they have the paralysis analysis, and they can't move. They have no direction because there's no certainty. I think that from a fundamental just outcome standpoint could actually hamstring people and hinder them from achieving what they want to achieve. So I kind of view it that way. I think you're right. That makes a lot of sense just to have some certainty, even if you're wrong. Maybe, or at least if you're wrong in like some minor detail or something that's maybe not so important. But I think
Yeah.
there's value to it. I think way too many people dismiss religion. I was one. I was guilty. But I think there's some serious utility here for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, where I think it goes beyond the logical or just utilitarian view of it is, when I looked back at my life, and I think a lot of us can say this, that are believers. You may attribute it to something else, but when I look back at my life, I can see that it was orchestrated intentionally. When I was, off doing whatever I thought was best or whatever I felt like doing at that time, or I was just trying to find a job somewhere, and I just so happened to find the job where, I met the guy who encouraged me to start my business and met the guy who introduced me to my wife. And, I mean, it's just when we can always connect the dots looking back as humans.
Hmm.
And I truly can see that my dots have been lined up intentionally, for at least to be at the point that I'm at now. Does it all make sense? No, because it probably won't be connected to a dot until later on in my life. And so that is hard to deny. The experiences that I've had that have led to, future things or where I'm at currently. Also, man, like, I live in Colorado. I know you said you live in Utah. You've lived in Montana. Like,
Oh no, no, I'm actually in Tennessee now. I lived in
okay,
Utah like 3 moves ago.
gotcha. Okay. You'll get my point though. I mean, I walk outside and I've got a mountain range right here, that
Mm,
I can look at. And when I truly believe that at the bottom of science and that way of viewing things is God. I think people do end up at this point of like, there is no way that this was just by chance. This was divinely created in the way that everything works together, and it had to be very specific for it to operate this way, or it wouldn't have worked. And so, just seeing creation and how everything works together and how it was intentionally designed tells me that there's a creator that I should probably believe in. Even our human bodies are capable of just incredible things. The stuff that people eat these days, man. I mean, just the fact that we
mm.
can stay alive for 80 years, the way that we treat our bodies is just absolutely
Ugh.
incredible. Or we can heal itself, or whatever it is. Like, I think it's proof that we were created in the image of God, just to be able to see how things work and know, like, no, just not, there has to be something, at least. I think we all can agree on that. Is like, there has to be something that has a understanding way above my own or any of us on this planet.
Well, hey man, I agree with you there. There's something. There is definitely something. No claims about what that something is from me. I'm still pretty overwhelmed by it. But hey, this is a great place to end it, man. And by the way, I want to tell everyone I was late to this thing, and I just want to put that on the table. So we've already kept you here long enough. But man, I could talk to you for another 2 hours. This has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. Like, I was really looking forward to this episode. You're just a super positive guy. This entire channel is about self improvement and helping to improve the world through these conversations. And I really appreciate you contributing.
Awesome, Brent. Well, I appreciate you having me, and hopefully we'll be able to have another fruitful conversation soon, man.
100%. You got to come back, man.
Sounds good, brother.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Yep. See you.